Anyway, welcome. Another great session last week. We had tons of great feedback, so lots of funny emails. So thanks for that. And also, we had to jump online with a number of you to try and help you individualize or correct techniques. So I hope that was helpful. We're gonna kind of maintain the theme on the hip thing for one more week. So basically, to walk you through what we've been doing, if you remember the joint by joint model, we alternate between areas of stability and areas of mobility. And in this case, we've been focusing on your hips, which are supposed to be mobile, to allow your core or your back to stay stable. And if you mess with that formula in this, if you get your hips too stable or too stiff, then your body has to gain mobility in your low back. And the repetitive strain formula that happens from that builds over time to create back pain and injury. So week one was about starting to introduce some hip mobility exercises. They were basically what were called hip dissociation exercises. They're an entry-level exercise meant to reprogram your body on how to move at your hips instead of in your back. So I hope that's been going well. You should have been doing them for almost a couple of weeks now. Last week was all about some secrets around how to do some stretches in a way that defines or differentiates between flexibility and mobility. Mobility means that there's an element of movement control there. So we started to get into a different type of stretch called pails and rails, which is basically activating your nervous system in new ranges of motion to reset the switch so that your nervous system can actually control those new ranges of motion and you can maintain the flexibility and the mobility. So this week, what we're going to do to build on that is it's time to start getting stronger. So the idea is now that you've reprogrammed and learned how to move the body part correctly, now we have to build the strength there so it can actually do the work for longer periods of time. So these exercises I'm going to go through today, there's going to be 3 of them. They're designed to start getting your butt stronger, basically, and they're meant to replace the exercises that you learned in week 1. So if you're still having a little bit of difficulty with the week 1 stuff, don't worry, you can keep doing that if you want. Or if you're finding that those exercises are too Mickey Mouse or too easy, then you're going to phase those out and you're going to start replacing them with the ones I'm going to go through today. So just a bit of information for you before we start demoing the exercises. I don't know if you've heard this term, like people get told all the time that their glutes aren't firing properly. And I've always been curious what that means because we're born that our nervous system is supposed to be talking to our muscles. And so why is it that some of us get what we call gluteal amnesia, where your brain just kind of forgets how to recruit your butt muscles? It is a nervous system thing, so I'm going to geek out on you a little bit with some neuroscience. There's 2 reasons. One is what we call reciprocal inhibition, and the other one is called synergistic dominance. So those are kind of big words, but what they mean, reciprocal inhibition just means if you're tight on one side of the joint, then the muscles that move the joint in the opposite direction will be inhibited. The nervous system will not let you fully recruit them. So inhibition means you can't fully use the muscle, so it'll come out as weakness. And then what happens is you get this phenomenon called synergistic dominance, which is a synergy means our bodies think in terms of movement, not individual muscles. And so if I decide I want to walk from point A to point B, our brain has to come up with a formula or a mechanism to make that happen. And if you're caught in that loop where certain muscles are not fully online and not available, your brain has to create a strategy or a workaround to allow you to keep moving. And the way it does that is it grabs muscles that can kind of do the similar action. So they're synergistic, they work together with the big prime moving muscles. It grabs those to accomplish the movement. Now, the downside to that is now you've got a situation where you're asking muscles to do a job that they're not really designed to do. So they'll kind of get the job done, but they're very inefficient at it. So they'll fatigue really quickly. And so what you'll find is you just can't do as much because those smaller muscles simply aren't capable. And also, they create more stress and strain because they're not really designed to do that. So then that repetitive strain formula builds over time until you get pain and injury. So how does that all hang together? So let's take a really simple example of we're going to go out for a walk. So if you just, just maybe get down. So basically, if we're talking hips, okay, so walking, let's say you come onto a leg. Well, what the muscle or the body has to do when you come onto the leg is it has to be strong in these outside hip muscles, because as the other leg comes out, if these guys are too weak, you'll sag into the hip. So from the front, if I come onto that leg and these guys aren't strong to keep our pelvis level, you'll do what we call a Trendelenburg or a pseudo-Trendele. You'll sag into the hip. And then in order to get that leg to swing through, your body has to look for a different muscle or group of muscles. And typically it'll grab one little muscle up front here called your TFL and a little bit of your back muscle to kind of shore things up so that you can keep moving. And again, that's not an efficient pattern. It's so it'll fatigue very quickly. And also now you're asking muscles to do jobs they're not designed to do, so it can create injury. So we want to reverse that. The other part of gait when we're walking is as you transition, so you come onto the leg and then you're going to push off. Well, in order to push off, you're supposed to use your big butt muscle, your glute muscle. But to the point that we're saying, well, your glutes aren't firing. Well, if that guy isn't there for you, your body will typically look around, and usually what will happen is we'll see it grabbing the hamstring and a part of your back. So then when you're walking, you'll see that repetitive flexion and extension happening across your low back. So these would be people that go for walks and get progressive back pain across the belt line. I don't know if you're there. If that's you, but that's probably the formula you're stuck in. So that's the theory behind it. So what's the workaround? Well, the secret sauce that we're going to start going through today of how you get your glutes back online. So this is the 11 herbs and spices to getting your glutes firing, is basically what you want to do is you want to shut down the inhibition first. You want to get rid of those tight spots that are shutting you down. So if I go back to that example, I'm going to come onto a leg and then I'm going to push off. Well, if these guys can't fire, it might be because the muscles on the other side of the joint are too tight, which is kind of what we went through last week. So you got your hip flexors up front and maybe this TFL guy are too tight. So as you go to extend your hip and push off, these can't lengthen properly. So the nerves here are feeding back and telling the nervous system that, Houston, we have a problem. So in response, it's not letting you fully grab. So let me just grab that. Sorry, Zoom's giving me all kinds of warnings here. Okay, so what you need to do is you need to release the tight spots first, which will then shut down that reflex, and then you start to facilitate the weak stuff, or you start to strengthen. That's kind of the magic formula. So how you shut things down is you can roll them. We haven't really gone through too much rolling yet, but we might cover that in future sessions, but you can stretch them first. So that's all the stretches I went through last week for you. Good feedback on those stretches, by the way. I had a number of people contact me. They love the tip that, if you're too tight in the back of your leg and you're feeling like you're always having to stretch it, it may not be your hammies that are the problem. It might be your sciatic nerve. A couple of you I got online with, and we did a couple simple tests in the telehealth virtual session, and sure enough, they had sciatic nerve problems. So we gave them workarounds to get rid of the pain in their leg, and that really worked out well. So basically some of the stretches, we don't have time today to go through the stretches. All I'm going to do is put you into this level 2 of the hip strengthening routine. But keep in mind, if you've been told in the past that your glutes aren't firing or you're weak in the glutes, you might have to roll and stretch things first before you do these strengthening. And that might be all you need to finally get your butt doing its job again. Okay, so I hope that all makes sense. So what we're going to do is we're going to start to go through this. And again, I'll be following up with you with an email to links to all of these exercises and whatnot. So you can follow along a little bit today. And then when you get the links, you can practice on your own. So the first sequence is what we call the Buchberger sequence. Kelly Buchberger is an awesome physio trainer. He used to be the Blue Jays guy. I can't remember if he still is or not. But basically, it's a 5-part exercise, and you need to find a wall to do this, okay? So we're going to be up against a wall. So essentially, you're going to be laying on the wall. You want to get your butt and your back and your leg all in line against the wall, okay? And that makes sure you stay nice and straight. Phase 1, I'll just give you guys a second to get there. I see people trying to find walls. Okay, so phase 1. Now, the other thing, you might want to bias yourself a little bit so your belly button's pointing towards the floor. The mistakes here, the way you cheat, is you open up and you try and rotate yourself backwards. That's why the wall is there. So phase 1 is you're going to keep your legs straight. You're going to keep your heel on the wall, and you're going to start to lift your leg about 12 inches into the air, okay? And then you're going to go back down. Now, what I don't want to see, I don't want to see a toe flaring towards the ceiling, okay? I don't want any rotation in the hip. I want you to keep your heel against the wall and maybe even lead with the heel. Keep your toe either pointed neutral, straight ahead, or even down a bit, okay? The other thing is I want you to put your hand on your waist because I don't want any movement in the waist. You want to turn on these muscles and stabilize your core. Okay, so we're going to do 5 repeats of just lifting your leg from the ground up to about 12 inches. You should already feel that working these muscles on the side of your hip. Now, after 5 reps, you're going to stop with your leg in the air. And then the next phase is going to be, you imagine a plane of movement like this. There's a pane of glass. You're going to keep your knee and your ankle in that plane, and you're going to bring your hip up to 90 degrees, and then you're going to go back and you're going to touch the wall. Okay, we're going to do 5 of those in a row. So you go up to 90, back and touch the wall. Okay, that's 4, and I'll do a 5th one. Okay, now you've got your foot still at about a foot off the floor, 12 inches off the floor. So now what you're going to do is from the 12-inch mark, you're going to go up as high as your hip will go. And you're going to go up and back to 12 inches. Don't go to the floor. Whew, I can already feel my butt working. Okay. Again, don't cheat by letting that toe go towards the ceiling, and don't let your heel come off the wall. After 5, you're going to hold it up high. 4th part of the exercise is now, this is where the heel can come off the wall. You're going to do 5 circles forward. Again, don't let that toe flare. And then after 5 forward, you're going to go 5 backwards. Anybody else feel their butt cheeks screaming? All right, there's 5, and back down. Whew, that's 1 set on one side. Okay, so the exercise, again, we're a bit time limited, so I can't do the full routine, but then you would obviously flip onto the other side and do the same sequence. And then you would repeat that, and you want to get it so you can get up to 3 sets of those. Pretty tough exercise, so let me know how that goes. So that's the first exercise. It's called the Buckberger hip activation sequence. Awesome exercise. Okay, and remember, this is to replace the level 1 stuff we did a couple of weeks ago. All right, the second exercise is called hip rotations, but it's also, you can call it the fire hydrant if you want. But essentially, you're going to be down on all 4s. What's that? Probably the side is easier. Yeah, thanks. Okay, so again, we're going to be on all 4s. Last time I showed you on all 4s with a stick across your back for feedback. If you want, you can get one, but I'm just going to show you. And fire hydrants are basically, if you think of a dog, but essentially what you're going to do, we're going to rotate. So you're going to pick that hip up. You're going to stay stable through here so you're not moving through the back. And then you're going to start to bring the knee forward, out to the side like the fire hydrant, back, and you're going to perform 10 to 12 movements. Okay. After you go one way, then you're going to go back the other way. Okay. Again, I want to work your way up to about a set of 12 reps on each side. You're going to do each side 3 times. Those are called hip rotation exercises or fire hydrants. So you'd start with the buck burger ones, then you do the hip rotations, and then the last one, this is a combination of a mobility, stability, and a strengthening drill. They're called the 90-90s. These ones, you got to be a little careful if you've got any knee problems. Oh, I forgot to mention too, I've got some special socks on today. In light of the Alberta government announcing that we can reopen, I wore my special beer socks. A little celebration. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so 90-90 means we get into a position like this where your hip is at 90 and your knee is at 90. You put your hand on your waist, so you stabilize again, because I don't want any movement here. And then all you're going to do is you keep your back foot on the ground, and you're going to try and lift that knee as high as you can go. Okay? This will tell you how well your hip moves. Again, we're going to work our way up to 12 of them. So the interesting thing for me to watch is you'll also start to realize how your body tends to over or want to recruit your TFL, because some of you might even be feeling like you're cramping. Okay, after you've done 12 of those, then you would flip to the other side. Now, the interesting thing for you to watch is if you're tighter on one side than the other, meaning do you have a harder time getting into the 90-90 position on one side than the other? And that can give you some clues as to whether you've got these muscle imbalances set up preferentially on one side versus the other. That's actually an indicator we watch for. That's a predictor of future injury, is if you've got dramatic muscle imbalance where you're quite stiff or offline on one side versus the other. That asymmetry can build over time pretty obviously. So essentially that's the 3 exercises. There's the Buckburger ones, the 5-part exercise against the wall. There's the fire hydrant one, which is called the hip rotations, and then there's the 90-90. Now, these are meant to replace the level ones that you did in week 1. But if you don't feel like you're quite ready to stop the level ones, no problem. All you do is you can mix a little bit of what we did today in with level 1. A good example would be stop the clam exercises that you learned in level 1 and substitute in the Buckburger ones instead of the clams. So then your routine would be you'd lay on your back and you'd do the knee drops. Then you could be on all fours with the stick on your back, and you could do the sit your butt back on your heels, the child's pose. And then you could do the standing stick on your back and bend forward to make sure you're hinging at your hips and not your waist. And then you could, instead of the 4th exercise from level 1, which was the clams, then you would do the Buckburger ones, which is the 5-part exercise against the wall. So that's a great way to get your glutes online. And remember that formula that if you find that your glutes aren't really firing properly, I would do the stretching routine that we did last week. I would do that first before you do the glute activations. Okay, somebody just typed in that they missed the last exercise. It said Zoom session had ended. Okay, so I'll just kind of quickly show you the last one, which is called the 90-90. So that's basically you sit in a position on the floor with your hip at 90 and your knee at 90. And then as you stabilize at the waist, you're going to keep your foot on the floor, and you're going to slowly lift that knee up in the air, trying not to move at the waist. You're trying to do all the movement in your hip. And you're going to repeat that probably a dozen times, okay? Just up and down like that. Just watch your knees. If you've got sore knees, that's a tough position to get in. You do each side, and the warning I gave people is when you get onto the other side, just watch that or observe if you're significantly tighter on one side than the other. That's a thing we watch for in the clinic to see if you might be prone for injury. Asymmetry in muscle imbalance is a predictor of future injury. So if you are seeing a dramatic difference that you have a hard time sitting, say, with your left leg back compared to your right leg, then you might want to get a hold of me to see if there's anything we need to do to do a workaround. So that's a great hip activation strategy. Keep in mind, if you're having trouble with the glutes firing, then you might need to do the stretches we did last week before you try the glute activation sequences. So that wraps up the hip mobility. There is further progressions we usually go through, but if you build on this, that package I gave you over the last few weeks is going to be great to getting your hips moving better to offload your back. So what I'm hoping to do next week is to start to introduce some actual core stability exercises. So this builds on the formula where we've mobilized your hips. Now we're going to start to build on stabilizing your core. So there's what we call the big four. There's 4 principled exercises that we start to walk you through on how to progress yourself to build better core stability. As always, feel free to reach out. Either type if you got questions in the chat that you want to know, just put it in the chat and I'll get back to you. Or you can email or call us and we'll sort out how to make this work for you. Thanks, everybody.